Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Arna Sahu, host of Arna's News, where on this podcast channel, I aim to eliminate the gender gap in the STEM fields by featuring inspiring female professionals and highlighting their stories and accomplishments to further encourage girls. Today on episode 33.
But there's plenty of scope to pursue a career in design or product management or data, hiring, learning and development, all under the umbrella of tech. So if software engineering is not your thing, that doesn't automatically eliminate tech companies from your job search. Designers and product managers are as much a part of the process of building software as are engineers. They are critical, in fact, in shaping the success of the product.
Today on episode 33, I'm pleased to announce our guest, Sharadha Ramakrishnan. As an engineering coach at Digits, a company that helps build next-generation financial tools that solve the industry's biggest pain points, and prior director of engineering of data and analytics platform at Yelp, she is a passionate advocate for women in technology and women in leadership, making the tech industry more conducive for moms. Since 2015, data has been her pure focus, and she loves to exchange stories about building data platforms and encouraging a data-informed culture. Valuing collaboration over all else, she strives to be as valuable as she can in all of her relationships as well. So thank you so much, Shar, for being here today. Before we dive into the questions, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Arna. I think this is amazing. I, was so excited to receive your message on LinkedIn. I'm so excited to be here as well. I think you did a phenomenal job introducing me already. The only thing I will add there is, yes, data has been my focus, but I'm also super excited to be now exploring the fintech world at Digits, and I'm learning something new every single day. I'll also add that I have two children, a 3-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter, and I live in the Bay Area, love traveling, love hiking, and I'm also a photographer.
I'm so excited to interview you. Thank you so much for being here. All right, so my first question for you is, tell us a bit about your career path.
Yeah, so I am from the generation of Indians whose parents still believed that the only two options for a career path was medicine or engineering. I picked engineering, as is evident. So after graduating with a degree in software engineering, I started my own software company, bootstrapped purely by contracts with other startups in the United States who were willing to outsource work to smaller companies like mine, essentially. So for 5 years, I worked with startups in different domains, which contributed to an amazing breadth of knowledge that I gathered along the way. So I built software systems to analyze the risk portfolio of a company's intellectual property and learned a ridiculous amount of information about the US patent law. I wrote UDP protocols for mobile networks. I essentially built try before you buy gear rental web shops. And finally landed in a space that I was feeling most comfortable with, which was DevOps. It was all the rage back then, and I jumped on that bandwagon, building out like infrastructure for other companies, and building out and orchestrating like observability for systems and applications. So I eventually found myself building data platforms, familiarizing myself with the nuances and challenges of that very, very incredibly complex world. And now I'm applying those skill sets to fintech at my current company, Digits. So through the years, I've gone through from being like a founder, engineer, intern, back to being an engineer, and then shifted into the management path about 8 years back. So I left Yelp as a director of engineering, having built an organization of 50 engineers or so. While that stint was incredibly satisfying, I wanted to bring my skill sets as a coach to a smaller engineering team where I won't be so removed from the implementation details, and Digits kind of perfectly fit the bill. So currently I'm a coach at Digits, and what I do there is I work with individuals at the company to enable them to bring their best selves to work. I talk to them about what's preventing them from bringing their best selves to work. We talk about career paths. We talk about like, how can we get them the best opportunities to realize their full potential. I also like coach engineering teams to make sure like nobody is working in isolation, that collaboration happens in the most effective way. And I absolutely love doing that because I feel like that human coaching part of technology is what actually it's all about and kind of helps build amazing products.
Yeah, I love how you went through a variety of different places before you finally found DevOps. That's really, really impressive.
Thank you.
And what advice would you give someone wanting to pursue a career similar to yours? And do you have any tips to succeed?
Yeah, so my answer to that question has changed a lot over the years. But now with over like 13 years in the industry, I finally have a list that I feel have shaped my career, and what's worked for me. So almost all my opportunities have stemmed from something very simple, which is being willing to make connections, even if it's uncomfortable to do so. So ranging from landing a job at Yelp by talking to a stranger on the Caltrain to landing my first contract for my startup by talking to the keynote speaker at a conference, I've always believed in like the power of building connections with people around you, much like what you did when you reached out to me on LinkedIn. And almost always there's an opportunity there that will change your life. But the best part about being willing to make those connections is the opportunity to learn from people from many diverse backgrounds, something that's not possible to do if we're not willing to push beyond the comfort zone of our immediate circle. There's a really beautiful episode on NPR's Hidden Brain about the power of tiny interactions. It's something that I haven't seen talked about a lot with respect to like career building and how you shape your career essentially, but it's the single biggest thing that has shaped who I am today. If I had to turn this into a piece of advice, it would be to say, don't ignore that part of you that wants to say hi or ask that burning question or simply just share your opinion on a topic just because you don't know the company you're in or because they don't know you, because your attempt at saying what's on your mind is essentially your first step to making that connection. Worst case, you get to walk away and never see them again. So that's one thing. The other thing that I have learned over the years as a woman in tech is to surround yourself with allies. By allies, I mean people who are willing to recognize the privilege that they have and choose to use it to amplify my voice when I'm in the underrepresented minority group, which I mostly am. In most rooms, I'm probably the only or the one of two women engineers in the room. So people who essentially will go out of their way to get me a seat at the table because they not only value my skills, but also the diversity of thought I bring. People who will not just mentor me, but also sponsor me for positions when they know I can have as large of an impact as them, if not larger. So the strength of this next generation, I truly feel, of tech workers and tech workplaces is the awareness around allyship and how central it is to the culture in many companies. So when you're starting off your career or looking to grow in it, don't sell yourself short on finding a workplace that truly embraces this culture, because I definitely think there's many, many out there.
Yeah, guys, listen up. Building connections and making an ally is very important. As a student myself, it's kind of difficult to ask questions, especially in a classroom setting, because you only have so much stuff to cover. But just asking that question is just so important because it might come up on tests, might come up on finals and discussions, and things like that are so important to be aware of.
100%. And I always say, there's this famous quote, there's no stupid questions. That is 100% true. But I also say, if you have a question, it is 100% likely somebody else in the room also has it. So you're always doing a favor by asking that question and helping people out. So go ahead and do it.
Yeah. And what is a common myth about your profession that you want to debunk?
Yeah, you have to tell me if this is still a myth, but I feel like there's still a pretty widespread notion that you need a technical degree to be in tech. So media shows the tech industry to be like a bunch of dudes with PhDs sitting in their parents' basements building software that tomorrow they'll just go and sell for $1 billion, right? That could not be further away from the truth.
True.
I mean, it's still filled with a lot of dudes, don't get me wrong, but there's plenty of scope to pursue a career in design or product management or data, hiring, learning and development, all under the umbrella of tech. So if software engineering is not your thing, that doesn't automatically eliminate tech companies from your job search. Designers and product managers are as much a part of the process of building software as are engineers. They are critical, in fact, in shaping the success of the product. So data is another space that is in high demand today. Imagine just being able to explore trends and patterns in data that could potentially be impacting decision-making at all levels of a growing business. You know, how powerful does that sound? When I was at Yelp, like there was a significant push to change the culture of the company to be more data-driven. And it is a true challenge. I think instinctively we as humans trust our gut more than data, but like building systems that enables it to be delightful to look at data and make decisions on it, because almost always it will be well-founded. I think that's a great career path to choose. Similarly, technical hiring is an extremely hot space to be in. Hiring for a tech company enables you to be in a position of power to set the company's culture, making it conducive for people from all walks of life. So as when I've, in my engineering leadership career, I have worked with many recruiters in that journey. And they are extremely critical in helping build a strong team that can lead the business into success. So these roles are not as talked about when someone says they want to choose a career in STEM, but educating ourselves about like the various ways to enter tech can blow the possibilities wide open. And there's always, once you're in, there's always options to like educate yourself, learn from boot camps, learn from your coworkers, and career shifts happen all the time. So I would say like definitely I wish people don't pigeonhole themselves into like this one notion that the only way to enter tech is to do programming.
Yeah, that's very true. I come from a cloud background, so my dad, he's in cloud computing, and he always talks about data. So that's something. And even though software engineering hasn't always appealed to me, as a kid, I never really liked software engineering, but now I kind of do. um, I think it's really important to know that computers isn't always just programming. There's so many other things behind it. There's the architectures, there's design, there's the project management, so many different components into computers that not many people see.
100%, I definitely agree with that. I have one more myth I want to debunk, and that's the fact that many people think that success comes overnight. For most people in tech, whether they're a founder or a new grad engineer, success does not happen overnight, and failures actually become their biggest gifts. Again, a fault of the false perception that media has created about young founders becoming millionaires overnight, right? And that's led to people expecting that from all young founders. As you can tell, this is very personal because when, I can tell you the disappointment was palpable when my startup failed, and it failed pretty badly. So in fact, the disappointment crushed me more than the fact that my startup failed. What I didn't realize is that most startups fail. We just don't hear about them. We only hear about the unicorns and the successes. And I also didn't realize that until I first told my story about how I started up my own company and went through all of this and it kind of like bombed at the end of it, that my journey was actually considered a positive on my resume. It didn't matter that my startup had failed. They just wanted me to hire me for that same experience because I wouldn't be making those same mistakes twice. Like I've already been bitten once. I had a struggle story to tell and I had pushed myself out of my comfort zone. It just took me a while to realize that those were actually desirable traits.
Yeah, I have two things to add to that. A lot of people that I've interviewed, they've always said that success is not linear. It's like progression isn't in a linear type of stroke, so there might be some stagnant areas, and also rejection is redirection. So just because you're not going to the same place or whatever, doesn't mean that your life is going to fail. There's always choices out there.
100% agreed.
And if you could step into my shoes or your younger self, what would you have asked yourself that I didn't?
So help me understand this question. I've been trying to interpret it. My interpretation was, in the context of this interview, would you have asked me something if I was you? Is that the interpretation?
Yeah, kind of. It's like, what would you have asked your younger self?
Oh, what would I have asked my younger self?
Yeah, it's like
I see.
introspective.
Okay, got it. So that's not how I'd interpreted it, but like I will tell you what I wish I had asked my younger self. I often I often shied away from taking up opportunities and from taking up things that came my way because I was made to feel like less than the boys in my class. And that happened in many different ways. It happened by way of the boys themselves celebrating certain things that I did that was just table stakes, and saying, oh, for a girl, this is like really amazing. It came from societal conditioning. It came from a lot of different places. The one thing that I never stopped to ask myself is, are you not taking this opportunity up because you really lack the skill sets to do this, or because you've been told that you couldn't do something? And I never stopped to consider that that was the case. So I wish if I had gone back in time and I had asked myself that question, I think it would have been maybe a couple of steps away. But if I had gone down that journey, I would have understood that it's a lot of societal conditioning that's essentially made me shy away from taking certain things up, or believing that, I was not capable of picking up a large opportunity. And I probably would have gone for it earlier than I did in life. It took me a while to kind of navigate that.
Yeah, a lot of these stereotypes, like the place you're born in, they kind of shape the way I was gonna combine brain and mind together, but they shape the way your brain thinks. And I always say this to myself whenever I'm down, but your brain is basically like the biggest opponent to you. Like your inner critic is always going to be against you. So it might always hinder your obstacles. So that's something to watch out for.
Absolutely. And I've had an interesting upbringing as well. I grew up in the Middle East and then I moved to India. My parents moved me to India essentially when I was like 15 years old. So it was like a big culture shock for me as well. And I think it was just kind of the society we were in. It was not as forward or aware as it is today. And it has been a journey. Every society has its own journey. But I think if someone had paused to ask me that question, or if I had asked it myself, I think, like I said, I could have gotten to where I did earlier than the path that I took. But hindsight is 2020. So
I like that quote. Hindsight is 2020.
yeah.
And what are the best resources / books that have helped you find your career path?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, Arna, I have had this question come my way in a lot of different settings, but I'll be very, very transparent. I'm not the kind of person that reads a lot of nonfiction books. I love reading psychological thrillers and fantasy books because that's kind of what takes my mind away from like other things, and it's what I love doing. But where I actually learn from is essentially reading articles that are shared from coworkers or people that recommend certain articles, people's experiences and discussions. Like if you just go on LinkedIn, there's just so much content that you can consume that allows you insight into like how other people view the world and how they've faced challenges. One of the things that I loved doing at Yelp was we used to have this cohort of managers, and when I first entered the management path, there was a lot I didn't know. But whenever we came together as a team, one of the things we would do is like somebody in the group would share one article and say, let's read this and come into this meeting. And so we would come into that meeting and everybody would have read it. And there'll be a set of questions that this person has prepared. And so we would just like discuss that article and learn from each other. There's also another thing that we used to do. We used to apply that to real life, right? We used to take that article and apply it to like maybe challenges we're facing, people that we're helping, people that we're, having certain challenges with. And nothing has helped me learn more than that. So I would say that my tendency is to gravitate towards creating communities for knowledge sharing. And this is a pattern that I've repeated throughout my life, probably unconsciously. For example, during the pandemic, I was a new mom. I had absolutely no clue what I was doing. And I needed to keep alive this like really young thing. And so I knew a lot of other moms were in the same place. So I created like a WhatsApp group of just 10 other moms that I knew that were going through the same thing. Until today, people in that group will message me and say, this is the single most useful group we have ever used in the entirety of our WhatsApp kind of engagement, right? And so it's just the way I gravitate. I think like creating communities, learning from other people, that's how I learn.
Yeah, it's so cool. I'm so happy that you took the initiative because although you're really clueless, you did it and you made a place for a lot of other people to talk to as well.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of other communities that I'm super proud of as well. There was Awesome Women in Engineering at Yelp that we created a lot of programming for. It was the largest kind of employee resource group at Yelp, and people loved being part of that group because they felt so supported by other women in tech and allies as well. So it's definitely worked for me.
That's so impressive. And what do you think is the vital factor that shaped your career? What was your life before learning it, and what was your life after learning it?
Yeah, I thought about this a lot, and I think there's one thing that I will share with you. So I touched on this briefly earlier, but it took me a while to realize that a year is not a long time. I was always very, very impatient to see results for my work, and I would give up very quickly if things didn't pan out the way I hoped for it to. This is partially also an outcome of my upbringing. My parents are amazing. They are phenomenal, but they never quite nailed down how to play the long game. So when I began my career, I was hugely influenced by that. And it's partially why I love being a programmer so much, because the instant gratification that you get from running your code feels absolutely amazing. But transitioning into the management role completely changed me, both at work and in life. Being a manager, you kind of lose a lot of the success metrics you had as a programmer, right? You're not closing tickets. You're not like pushing code reviews. And this is something that you would do on a daily basis to know that, yes, you're making progress. But when you become a manager, you don't have any of that. So you probably won't see the fruits of your labor for several months, maybe even years. But the impact you could have as a manager or a coach could be a positive change in someone's career or someone's life, which takes time and patience. So learning that was a crucial like turning point, both at work and in life, because my perspective on time completely changed. Like I redefined what a year meant to me versus what it used to mean to me before. And so it allowed me to be a lot more patient with my personal life as well. And it allowed me to like play that long game. Like, yes, this investment is going to pay out at some point in the future. You just need to wait it out. And there's a lot of benefit to that. So I started understanding like essentially the value of playing the long game. And it's hugely benefited me in several aspects, including my recent motherhood, because children test your patience like nothing else. And they go through these phases that can last months, but just like knowing that taking that management path gave me that perspective of like, hey, this is not going to last forever. And at some point in time, whatever efforts you're putting in today is going to pay off. So that was very life-changing for me.
Yeah, patience is basically a virtue. And I have a funny story to share. Before quarantine, I feel like I lived two different lives. Before quarantine, like I don't know what was going on, but I basically forgot everything. It wasn't as if I was living my true life. And then when quarantine hit, that's when I had like a lot of self-reflection and I was like, what am I doing in my life? And then that's when time started to go by really fast because I was actually enjoying what I liked. And my whole perspective on time also changed. And those 2 years, at least for me, went by so fast. And I actually am really nostalgic about that time.
Oh, that's Amazing. That's amazing to hear. You often hear very like negative stories about the quarantine, but I feel like, you know, it never should have happened because it caused so much sorrow for so many people. But I love hearing some of the silver linings as well. So thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. And although it was kind of a horrible time, there were some ups and downs for me, but I just try to focus on the ups. That
Yeah,
was
yeah.
yeah, okay. And now that we have some extra time, what's one thing you wish you had known when you began your career path?
Yeah, so when about 2 years into my career after I'd started my company, I did this program in New York called the Hacker School, and I was there for 6 months. It's essentially like a programmers retreat. They renamed to Recur Center at the moment, and they're doing really well. But what you would do is a cohort of programmers, both and with varied ranges of like expertise and skills, would get together every single day for 6 months and just work on whatever they wanted to work on. There wasn't a goal, there wasn't like a deadline, nothing. You could just pick a project and pair with someone and just learn from them. And those 6 months of my life gave me more experience and more understanding about how computers work and how programming works than the 5 years that I went to school for, even though like I loved my time at school. And so we would have all these residents, creators of programming languages come in, pair with us, talk to us about how they build stuff. And it was phenomenal. And we were in New York. Like, what more could you ask for, right? So I think the one thing that someone had told me when I began my career was, or I wish I had known, was it's always okay to going back to being a student if you want to, and if you want to learn more. And I've done this not just that time, but I also did this again after my startup had failed. I went back to studying Linux kernel architecture for 9 months. And before I could enter the industry, I worked as an intern. 5 years into my career, I worked as an intern because I felt like it gave me a less pressurized environment to kind of learn and integrate myself into the industry because I'd never worked in the industry. I was just by myself until then. So I wish I had known that the end of my traditional school was really not the end of my traditional school. I can go back to being a student anytime I wanted. And that could have like kind of maybe given, if I had known that earlier, I probably would have tried to use that a lot more times and not thought of, like you said, success is not linear, you said. And I don't think career progression is linear either. Like you can go back and forth between like being like a professional and student anytime you want. And the most interesting part here is like the programmers retreat I went to, their slogan was never graduate. And I really, really took that to heart. Until today, I think that's something that I live by. Never graduate is something that I feel like has had such a positive impact on my life.
Yeah, that programmer retreat thing that you talked about where the creators actually like came, that made my jaw drop. So that is insane. I will definitely be checking that out. And and I feel like there's like this huge myth that once you're old enough to like get into the industry, you're not supposed to, in quote marks, go back to school because that's just not traditional. So I guess that's like another myth that a lot of people think about. And especially in my environment where I am, a lot of people say that once you're done with school, you just head out into the real world and that's it. That's it.
Definitely not true. I just think that there's so much. I mean, forget the acceptance, right? It's like if you really want to learn and if you want to have an environment where you can learn in a setting that's not full of pressure for you to perform or for you to deliver, I think that's the best form of learning. Of course, I realize the privilege that comes with that because you do need to be in a position where you can support yourself or someone needs to sponsor you. I luckily had stipends that the programmers retreat was offering that allowed me to do that and have that experience, which I'm incredibly grateful for. But I think it's something that everybody needs to consider.
Yeah. And how do you continue to learn in order to stay on top of things within your role?
Yeah, so this is probably another myth as well. When people think about engineering managers or coaches, they think about them as being the most knowledgeable in the room, or they think about them as having like the biggest stick in the room in terms of authority. It couldn't be the opposite, right? Like the engineering managers and coaches in the room have the shortest stick in the room, and they probably are not the best engineers in the room, or like not the most knowledgeable. So one of the things that I try to do a lot is essentially being willing to show my ignorance in those settings, because there are truly things that I don't understand when I go to meetings or when I talk with other engineers. And a simple act, it may sound very trivial, but the simple act of asking the question and saying, oh, that's an abbreviation that I'm not familiar with, or like maybe someone's talking about a thing for 5 minutes and I have no idea what the foundations is. So like going back to what the foundation is, oh, can you explain what that term means to me, because I'm not familiar with it, allows me at least to understand that, okay, these are the things, or just note down keywords like, oh, these are the things that I heard, these are the things that I feel like I should follow up on. And then later on, like going and looking that up, and always trying to like up level my knowledge, because it's very easy to like listen to a bunch of people talk and then come away with like high level ideas, but not poke into some of the details. So understand, like going one level deeper and understanding, okay, what is it that actually led to this point? And what are these different terms that I'm hearing that I'm not super familiar with, has always helped me kind of at least stay a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of like just building my own knowledge.
Yeah, like truly understanding something is really important. It's actually a very important learning concept, because as a student, if I don't understand something, there's something in my brain, I don't know what it is, but it will stop and it has to figure out what I'm doing. Like, say a math problem, if I don't get how I got the step, then I will not move on to the next problem, even though it's due. And it's kind of annoying, but it helps me figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. So I guess I can relate.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Like trying to just get to the bottom of it and see. But there's one important nuance there, which we talk about a lot in tech, because as programmers, we're problem solvers. So when we get stuck on something, the thing that we do is kind of like try and figure it out. Like, what is causing this? Like, what's the bug? But I always say time boxing is an important thing to do, because you're not an island in a tech company on your team. You have people you can rely on. Yes, you may want to spend like 15 minutes on like debugging by yourself, or like thinking about it by yourself, but just the simple act of talking about the problem with somebody will probably just, something will click in your mind, right? And that's also important to do, right? Because yes, you want to figure something out, but you also have this host of people and like information available to you, and so why not depend on it instead of like being stuck on it for 2 days together?
Yeah, like whenever I'm doing like math with my dad, even though I'm confused, the second I talk about it with my dad, something in my brain just like, it's like a light bulb moment, and then I finally get it.
Yeah. Have you heard of the concept called rubber ducking?
No, I haven't.
It's essentially like, if you have a rubber duck in front of you, it's not going to talk back at you, but if you're in a you're kind of feeling blocked on a problem, just look at the rubber duck and try to explain what you're doing and how you're trying to solve it. And as you're talking to the rubber duck, you'll arrive at the solution. So that's the concept, because you don't even need anybody to like tell you what it is. It's just the concept of explaining what you're doing to somebody, that will, because you don't think like that in your head, but when you're talking to somebody, you're trying to make sense of it. So I really find that concept fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I will definitely get a rubber ducky and use it.
Sounds good.
And last but not least, do you have any quotes or mottos that you love to follow and would like to share?
Yeah, I think you and I both shared some very interesting quotes and mottos throughout this entire interview, but I will leave you with one that seems to be the motto of my life right now. It's assume best intentions. So anytime I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody, or build a relationship at work, or have a conflict with someone because we don't agree on a decision, I think the thing that has led to the best outcomes is always to assume the other person has the best intentions. Nobody is there to assert their superiority, or nobody is there to like be mean to you, or nobody is there to kind of put you down. Yes, there are scenarios where if that's happening, you need to recognize that. And there's ways in which you can do that where, you're educated enough to realize that, you're probably being discriminated against. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking for the most part, assuming best intentions for people around you puts you in a place where you're willing to engage in that conversation, look past some of the things that might irk you, and go to a place where it's like, okay, both of us want to solve this problem with the best possible intentions. How can we work together? So that's the motto of my life at the moment, at least.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. Before we end off, would you like to say any last words to the audience?
I think I'll go back to where I started this interview. It's don't hesitate to make connections. I think it is the single biggest thing that has led to the opportunities that have come by in my life. And I will again take you as the example. I've been so impressed. I've only talked to you twice, but like so impressed by the way you've reached out. I listened to some of the episodes on your podcast. I've been talking about it with my husband and been like, I'm so mind blown by Arna and how she's put this together. I think that you've started your career so early in life, and it makes me feel so inspired to see that. So I'll just say for everyone out there, there's several ways to break into tech. Even running a podcast is like a great way to break into tech, and never stop making connections.
Thank you so much for those words of encouragement.
Of course, Arna.
Thank you for tuning in to Arna's News, where we aim to inspire and empower women in STEM by featuring the stories of successful female professionals in the industry. Today, we had the pleasure of hearing from Sharadha Ramakrishnan, engineering coach at Digits, who shared her invaluable advice on embracing one's self-awareness and the role of developing emotional intelligence as a leader. Thus, that concludes episode 33. If you want to know more about how I relate to these amazing topics, then stay tuned for upcoming episodes. A free way to support this show is by leaving it a 5-star rating and a review on the player you are listening to. Let me know what you enjoy about this podcast, as it's a chance to tell me what you love about the show, and it helps others discover it too. Once again, thank you for finding me, and I hope we stay in touch with each other. Tito, you were listening to Arna Sahu, the host of Arna's News. Toodles!